remote island in the vast Pacific Ocean, one of the most isolated and far-flung places, surrounded only by thousands of kilometers of water, is Nauru, the smallest island country and one of the most extraordinary places on the planet. This fascinating place is full of single, exotic women looking for love to help them face the many difficulties they have to live with. Get ready to discover the mysterious and fascinating reality of Nauru in this new video from Uncensored World. An island with surprising dualities, such as having gone from being the richest country in the world thanks to such extraordinary facts as bird droppings, to becoming one of the poorest, with changes that modified even its geography, filling the country with craters, giving it an appearance similar to that of the moon. Or realities such as that of currently having the highest rate of obese people on the planet, with men who on average eat the equivalent of more than 6 chickens a day. Realities that make Nauru not only the third smallest country in the world, but also one of the most amazing places on Earth. But beyond its history and its present, this country hides wonders and surprising curiosities that have a lot to do with it being one of the most remote places on the planet. Realities that caused Nauru to go from being one of the most prosperous places to becoming an open-air prison for Australian refugees, or to contain one of the most curious sports in the world, in which men throw lasso-like ropes into the air to catch birds, which they later care for as pets. Don't miss this new Uncensored World video to learn about the many curiosities behind the fact that in this remote country more than 90% of the population is considered obese, or the reasons why its exotic women feel a special attraction for foreign men. Let's get started. In an isolated corner of the Pacific Ocean where thousands of kilometers of unbroken water surround a small remote island, lies Nauru, the world's smallest island country. With an area of just 21 square kilometers, Nauru is a truly tiny paradise, a place so remote that it seems to escape the view of the rest of the world, which is surely why Nauru is one of the most exclusive and least known destinations on Earth, as well as one of the least visited. Often ignored by travelers and tourism agencies, Nauru is also one of the most extraordinary corners of the planet, because as well as its extraordinary beauty, this country hides surprising mysteries, such as being considered the place with the highest density of obese people in the world, having gone from being one of the richest places to one of the poorest, or having been used for years as an open-air prison for Australian refugees. But the curiosities of Nauru do not end here, as this country has no official capital, and its only administrative district, Yaren, is home to the government, parliament, and embassies. But it is not a city like the ones we are used to seeing. Instead, the island is marked by a very limited infrastructure, where you can travel to every corner by car in just over an hour. With only 30 kilometers of roads and a railway line of barely 4 kilometers, the island becomes a manageable but equally fascinating territory, with a rustic and isolated beauty that makes it unique. Despite being one of the smallest and least visited nations in the world, Nauru possesses a cultural richness and history that are unique in the world because of all this. Only about 200 people venture each year to discover this remote corner of the planet, facing the difficulties of access and the expensive visas that make Nauru an inaccessible jewel for many. The difficulties in reaching this island and the lack of frequent flights make it a mystery that few dare to solve. However, those who do discover an island that remains one of the best-kept secrets in the Pacific. The name Nauru comes from the word Nauero, which means "I go" in the local language, reflecting the tradition of the native Micronesians and Polynesians of this island. The reality of this small nation has to do with a history full of significant changes. The island was inhabited peacefully by Micronesians and Polynesians for centuries, until the British arrived in 1798. Years later, the island became a German colony, and later suffered a Japanese occupation during World War II, before achieving independence in 1968. These events left their mark on Nauru, transforming it into a nation with a rich and turbulent history, events that also had a bearing on the fact that this country was considered for years to be the richest place on the planet, a curiosity that we will soon go into in detail. This description is also related to the small size of this island, considered to be the third smallest country in the world, surpassed only by the Vatican and Monaco. Despite its minuscule size, the island has a remarkably high population density, and its small territory means that the whole country is within easy reach. Here, every corner can be reached in a short time, creating a uniquely intimate experience. With a population of just 10,000, Nauru has also been listed as one of the countries with the highest rates of obesity in the world, a reality that you will soon learn about. This phenomenon has had a profound impact on local society and its lifestyle, and it also has to do with the fact that many of its exotic women, and also men, are particularly interested in foreigners trying to escape the many difficulties that this country faces. Thinking about the smallest countries in the world, while the Vatican is a center of religious power, and Monaco an emblem of luxury and ostentation, Nauru, the third smallest country in the world, remains today a forgotten and isolated corner of the world, although this was not always the case. In the past, Nauru enjoyed a golden age that catapulted it to worldwide fame, becoming one of the richest countries on the planet and leading this ranking for years. This tiny dot in the middle of the Pacific achieved its impressive fortune thanks to phosphate, a natural resource formed by the excrement of seabirds, which in its time was considered white gold. The exploitation of this resource transformed Nauru into a nation of great economic power. In the 1970s, the per capita income of Nauruans reached astonishing figures, far exceeding that of nations such as the United States, and the island experienced a period of unparalleled luxury and prosperity. To give you an idea, in 1975, the per capita income of Nauru's inhabitants reached $176,000 a year, more than triple the per capita income of the United States at the time. In those years, Nauru's few roads were traveled by luxury vehicles such as Cadillacs and Jeeps, while the government financed everything from healthcare to education and housing without the need to pay taxes. The Nauruans enjoyed a carefree lifestyle, traveling the world and living in an abundance that seemed endless, but they did not know the difficulties and changes that the future would force them to live through. The history of Nauru would become one of the best examples of how the overexploitation of natural resources can lead nations to ruin. On this remote Pacific island, phosphate mining, which at the time brought the island absolute wealth, ended up devastating the island's environment. Over the years, intensive phosphate mining left the interior of the island virtually uninhabitable, turning it into a landscape more like the moon, a place full of craters. In the mid-20th century, experts were already warning about the irreversibility of this ecological damage and how these changes could have serious consequences for the people of Nauru. In response to this crisis, Australia assumed responsibility for guaranteeing a dignified future for the Nauruans, and plans were even discussed to relocate the entire population, with plans as extreme as turning the island into an open-air prison, as you will discover later. But the Nauruans, despite the bleak outlook, initially decided to resist. Phosphate mining resumed in search of a last hope, but reserves were quickly depleted, plunging the island into a severe economic crisis. The phosphate mines were sourced from the excrement of seabirds, which, over thousands of years, had accumulated and fossilized in deposits on the island. This excrement, rich in phosphorus, was the basis of the phosphate that was extracted. However, due to intensive exploitation and the lack of new deposits, the resources were eventually exhausted, leaving the island without its main source of income. In the following decades, Nauru went from being one of the richest nations to one of the poorest, facing high levels of unemployment, a deteriorated infrastructure, and high crime rates. Today, Nauru continues to struggle to regain its economic stability and restore its environment, becoming a clear example of the dangers of over-reliance on a single natural resource. The end of phosphate mining and the economic collapse brought chaos and corruption. The crisis worsened with climate change, which destroyed what little was left of the fishing industry. The island became an almost irreparable wasteland, with unemployment reaching almost 80% of the population. The situation seemed untenable, and in the midst of this bleak panorama, Australia saw an opportunity to intervene, albeit in a highly controversial way, to turn Nauru into a refugee prison. Australia was facing a growing number of refugees fleeing war and persecution in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, and was desperately seeking a solution to stem the flow of people arriving on its shores. Thus it was that the island of Nauru became a detention center, where refugees would be sent while their asylum applications were processed. In exchange, Australia would offer economic support to the nation, trying to help alleviate Nauru's economic crisis, but also taking advantage of the situation to reduce its migratory burden. Although the economic aid seemed to be a relief for the impoverished nation, the measure was extremely controversial. The refugees, many of them traumatized by their experiences, were held in harsh conditions, and the island became a symbol of Australia's toughest migration policy. Meanwhile, Nauru found itself trapped in a cycle of dependency, unable to escape the ecological, social, and economic disaster that had dragged them into misery. And so it was that this once rich and prosperous island paradise became a center of human suffering, both for its own inhabitants and for the refugees who arrived in search of a better future. But the difficulties did not end there. As social, economic, and environmental problems worsened, an even more shocking reality began to take shape in Nauru. The island became the country with the highest density of obese people in the world, a reality that continues to this day. This phenomenon has deep roots that are intertwined with poverty, limited access to fresh food, and the consequences of economic decline. The transformation of the diet in Nauru, which in its golden years had been a reflection of luxury and abundance, began to have devastating effects on the health of the population. With the disappearance of sources of income and the lack of a solid economic infrastructure, the island became increasingly dependent on cheap imported food, which was much cheaper but nutritionally deficient. Ultra-processed products, loaded with sugars and fats, became the most common food for the inhabitants of Nauru. This was compounded by a low level of physical activity, as mass unemployment and poverty led to a lack of options and exercise. The result was an alarming increase in obesity-related diseases such as diabetes, heart disease, and hypertension. As a result, Nauru today has one of the highest obesity rates in the world, with some indicators saying that more than 90% of its adult population is classified as obese. This figure places the country well above nations such as the United States, where approximately 36% of the adult population is obese, or Mexico, which has an obesity rate of close to 35%. In addition, 30% of Nauruans suffer from type 2 diabetes, a condition directly related to their diet and lifestyle. The caloric intake of Nauruans is another alarming factor. On average, adult men on the island consume 7,500 calories a day, while women ingest about 5,000 calories a day. This figure is disproportionately high compared to the world average, where the recommended consumption ranges between 2,000 and 2,500 calories a day. To put it in perspective, an adult man in Nauru would be consuming the equivalent of eating 6 or 7 whole chickens a day. With these realities in mind, we would like to ask you, would you be able to eat that much in a day? Or what do you think about these complicated realities in Nauru? It will be great to read your comments, and as you know, it's the best way you can help our channel, so thank you. This overconsumption of calories has deep roots in 2 main factors. Firstly, excess body weight is considered a sign of power and wealth in the local culture, which promotes a lifestyle of indulgence. And secondly, the island, due to its type of soil and lack of agricultural resources, depends to a large extent on the importation of cheap and highly processed foods, such as canned meats, which makes any effort to change these eating habits and thus improve the health of its population even more difficult. This health problem has, in many respects, been a reflection of the social and economic tensions that have plagued this remote island. In their struggle to survive in an environment of perpetual crisis, The people of Nauru have been trapped in a vicious cycle in which cheap and unhealthy food becomes a form of temporary consolation. The situation, far from improving, reflects the general collapse that Nauru has experienced in recent decades, with a health system overwhelmed by cases of obesity and its consequences. Poverty, lack of access to nutritious food, and the consequences of a past of splendor combine in a tragedy that affects both present and future generations. Possibly for these reasons, many women and men in Nauru see foreigners as one of the best ways to escape their complicated reality. Despite the serious economic and social problems facing Nauru, the island hides a unique beauty in its people, something that attracts the few tourists who visit. Nauruans, both men and women, are known for their exotic features that are very attractive in foreign eyes, and they take a great interest in travelers. Their beauty has a lot to do with the mixture of origins and the remote location, giving rise to a population with a distinctive appearance, sun-kissed skin, dark eyes, and a physiognomy that reflects the influence of ancestral Pacific peoples and other groups, such as the English, Germans, or Japanese, who have arrived on the island over the centuries. Despite its isolation, Nauru is home to a population with a unique identity. The women of the island, descendants of Micronesians and Polynesians, are known for their physical beauty and natural elegance. With distinctive features and healthy skin, they are admired not only for their appearance, but also for their resilience, their ability to keep traditions alive, and their optimism. Many of them wear traditional costumes that reflect the island's rich cultural heritage. It is common to find many single women in this country, and one of the reasons is that due to the social and economic challenges facing the island, many young people seek opportunities outside their home. However, many of these women are attracted to foreigners, partly because of the difficult situation facing the island. Nauru has faced economic, social, and political challenges, and the idea of escaping to experience other realities is appealing to them. This desire to explore is not due to a lack of interest in local men, but rather a longing to experience other cultures and perhaps find new opportunities. The women of Nauru are aware of their beauty and use it not only to attract attention, but also to open doors to a different future. For this reason, many tourists attracted by the search for something unique in this remote place cannot help but admire the singular beauty of the inhabitants of Nauru, despite the challenges they face. Curiosity about a distant and isolated world is one of the main reasons why many Nauruans are attracted to foreigners. Life in such a small place, surrounded by the vast ocean, generates a genuine interest in exploring other cultures and distant realities. Considering everything you have learned about Nauru so far, we would like to ask you, would you like to meet the women or men of Nauru? What has surprised you the most about this unique and remote island? Pause the video and leave us your comments. We'd love to hear from you and know your opinion. And as you know, doing so is the best way for you to support Uncensored World, to continue working to bring you such interesting videos every week like this one, so thank you. For many on Nauru, tourists represent an opportunity to escape, even if only temporarily, from their complicated daily lives. They are attracted by stories of other countries, the possibilities of a different life, and the idea of connecting with the world beyond the limitations of the island. This desire to explore is not only cultural, but also emotional, and in a place where difficulties are constant, meeting someone outside the closed circle of Nauru offers an escape route. The fact that Nauru is one of the smallest and least visited countries in the world also gives it an air of mystery and fascination. This isolated corner of the Pacific, without major tourist attractions or the luxuries offered by other destinations, hides a unique beauty and an intriguing history. Instead of the crowds of more popular destinations, visitors can discover an island that, although stripped of modern comforts, retains an authentic essence for those who venture to discover it. The inhabitants of Nauru live in their own world, disconnected from the big cities and the hustle and bustle of contemporary life, but they maintain an identity that makes this place unique in the world. A curious aspect of Nauru is that it has no army of its own. In the face of an external threat, Australia is responsible for its defense, a pragmatic decision that responds to the lack of resources to maintain armed forces in such a small country. Instead of investing in security, Nauru prefers to focus on the social welfare of its citizens, relying on the protection of its larger neighbor. Another very striking aspect has to do with sport. In Nauru, rugby is considered the national sport, with a large number of local followers and players. But the most curious and striking sport, which reflects the peculiarity of this island, is the art of catching birds in the air. In this sport, the men of Nauru use long loops to capture flying birds, a tradition that has been maintained over the years. The trapped birds are not only released, but are often kept as pets, being cared for and fed in people's homes. This sport, as well as being a fascinating skill, reflects the close bond that Nauruans have with their natural environment and is a practice that remains an integral part of their local culture. In addition to all these curiosities, and despite its size and isolation, Nauru has an incomparable natural beauty, which, together with the uniqueness of this remote paradise, and despite being considered the least visited place in the world, make this destination a place desired by those who are lucky enough to visit it. The island stands out for its exotic landscapes and unique fauna, and is also surrounded by a coral reef that makes it an ideal place for diving enthusiasts, while its unspoiled, almost uninhabited beaches allow you to enjoy the tranquility of a remote paradise. Furthermore, its geography presents a fascinating contrast. An island with little natural vegetation, but with a rich marine biodiversity and a surprisingly varied landscape, including lagoons and rock formations, and even craters due to the realities you knew before that give it a more lunar appearance, which make it even more attractive to the most intrepid travelers. With all this in mind, and having reached this point, you will probably be interested in finding out how it is possible to visit this remote paradise on Earth, and the most comfortable and economical way to do so. So we at Uncensored World have done some research to help you with this. To get to Nauru from America or Europe, the options are quite limited due to the island's distant and remote location. There are no direct flights from America or Europe, so it is necessary to make at least one stopover, usually in Australia. From Australia, several airlines operate weekly flights to Nauru. The main airline offering these routes is Nauru Airlines, which connects the island with Brisbane, Australia, and other cities in the Pacific region. The flight from Brisbane, for example, lasts approximately 4 hours, an idea that may help you understand how remote this country is. Once in Nauru, getting around the island is relatively easy, given that it is very small. In Nauru, there are no major means of public transport, so the most common option is to rent a car or a motorbike, or if you prefer, to use local taxis. Given that the island is only around 20 kilometers long, it won't be difficult to get around, and most of the tourist attractions and places of interest are within walking distance of each other. It is possible to rent vehicles through hotels or local agencies, although the options are not as abundant as in more touristy destinations. In terms of currency, the island uses the Australian dollar as its official currency. Tourists will find that most places accept cash payments, although some larger establishments also accept credit cards. However, it is advisable to carry some cash, especially if you plan to visit local markets or small shops, where card payment is not always possible. The official language of Nauru is Nauruan, although English is widely spoken and understood, especially in tourist areas and by the government. The majority of the population is bilingual, which facilitates communication for international travelers. The cost of living in Nauru can be relatively high compared to other destinations in the Pacific, due to its isolation and dependence on imports. For example, a coffee at a local cafe can cost around 5 Australian dollars, $3.30, or 3 euros. A beer costs approximately 8 Australian dollars, about $5, while a night in a mid-range hotel can cost around 120 Australian dollars, equivalent to $80, depending on the season and the type of accommodation. As for visas, citizens of most countries, including the United States and members of the European Union, need a visa to enter Nauru. However, the procedures are relatively simple, as you can apply for a visa on arrival, which is generally valid for 15 days. The cost of this visa is around $50 Australian. It is advisable to check the exact requirements in advance, as they may vary depending on your country of origin and the regulations in force at the time. As you can see, getting to Nauru from America or Europe requires a few stopovers, mainly via Australia, but the effort is surely rewarded by the uniqueness and beauty of this island. From Uncensored World, we hope that this video has helped you discover Nauru, as you have seen, one of the most fascinating islands on the planet. If so, don't hesitate to leave us a nice like and a comment. It's the best way to help us so that we can continue working every week to bring you content as interesting as this, or like this video that you can now watch, to discover another of the most mysterious and beautiful places on the planet. Click on it. You're going to enjoy it.